Today, we have a very compelling story that involves Cannabis Awareness Month, celebrating this April. This story will include creators and professionals speaking about cannabis and how they talk about it in their content, and also giving advice, sharing information that has been told, and more. Enjoy.
I'm Carlie Lumpkin. I'm a junior second sequence traditional nursing student at NYU Roy Myers. In my pharmacology and pathophysiology class, we've actually discussed cannabis and its uses, and we've talked about the pros and cons about it, and we've talked about like how it's used in cancer patients to help with things like nausea and stuff, but we've also talked about the cons like mental fog and like forgetting stuff and even like GI upset as like small things. But we definitely discuss both the pros and cons in terms of like what they can do for our patients. Cannabis and mental health, it's very directly linked. I feel like it does have a bunch of cons, whereas some people it may feel like it helps them with their depression or anxiety or those things. Some people it actually like accelerates those for them. It makes them more anxious, more depressed. Like it technically is like a down drug. It makes you very like down in your body, which can be good for people who are always like up and running all the time. But for people that are already going through a lot mentally, I feel like it's not the best coping mechanism. And so college students especially, like it's not marketed to them, but like, everybody in college is like know somebody that smokes weed or smokes weed themselves. They don't know if that's like if they're the perfect candidate for that or not. They're just doing what the crowd is doing or like doing what they think is best for their mental health, but they can actually be doing things that are detrimental to their health. And like for the psychosis thing, like you don't know how weed will affect you until you do it. So you don't want to be somebody who was like on edge for a mental break or going into psychosis, and then you do this, and then that's all it takes, and then you can't revert back because you never know like how this is going to affect you until after you've done it. We're still children. Your mind is not fully developed until you're 25, sadly. So like you don't know what choices you're making, how detrimental it is to your brain. Like this stuff is really killing your brain at such a like vital moment when you're like supposed to be soaking up this learning and knowledge. Like this can really be putting a halt in all of the. So I think it's very like interesting to look at that and then think about like the people, like you said, that are hosting these businesses. Why are they setting shop all around campus? Why are they doing that? Who is their target audience? Like, why is it that they're promoting these drugs to younger audiences? And then you go in these places and, there are stricter laws now with like the IDs and stuff, but a lot of these places are not checking IDs. They're not checking if you're 21. They don't care. They're just trying to sell whatever they can to you. So I think colleges should do more learning events about this to open the minds to college students, to tell them, yeah, this can help with this, but know what you're also getting yourself exposed to. My very first step in advising anybody is I would ask them, what is your reasoning for using marijuana? So, are you using this to cope with something else? Let's address the first problem. Let's address what it is first, that why you want to use substance to use this.
Oh, yes, my name is Jeff, and our channel is it's called Growing Old, and it's a cannabis channel. And what we like to do on this channel is we just like to promote how easy it is to make your own medicine at home. So we grow it. A lot of people, they see it one way, but then there's a lot of us that see it as a medication and how to set up your tent, how to grow, and then in the summer times, we have a greenhouse and we'll grow out there, and we'll show how big you can do it. But it shows you how to. It's a lot of gardening is what it is, and then every Wednesday and Saturday we'll have a live stream, and people come on, ask questions. They'll show what they're doing in their home and how things are going. But that's what our channel's about. And we try to get lesser known, say cannabis breeders or enthusiasts, get them a little attention, or content creators, so that they can build on their message and send out the same message. But I grow CBD every time we grow it. I'm not a doctor or nothing, but my wife, we'll take the CBD, and what we use a lot is the CBD that's it's got like no THC in it. It's just straight out CBD. And we'll make salves out of it. We'll make gummies out of it. We'll make oil out of it. And I give the oil, we take the oil, but I give the oil to the dogs every day. I cook them bacon and eggs, and they get some of that CBD oil because one of our dogs, she's like 10, she had knee surgery, and it helps her get around, and she acts a lot younger. But nah, I think if you're growing, and again, like I said, I'm not a big THC hunter. I'm a big terpene guy. But if you're growing out there, CBD is something you need to have in your garden because, um, yeah, even if, especially if you go with the non-THC side, that's good for people that don't like the THC and just want the like to make the salve and stuff because it really works. I've had 4 back surgeries and it really works. I believe, at least with the THC side of it, I think that should be 21 and older. Now the CBD, because I know I've read a lot on some growers growing it for like their daughter has, 300 seizures a day or something. So they went and they figured it out and uh, they grew it for her and it doesn't cause she doesn't have as many seizures. A friend of mine that I'm working with on some projects, he works in a facility and they've got doctors that could look at the amounts of the terpene profiles and they helped him figure out something for his daughter that helps her with she's got anxiety and stuff like that. So I mean it can be done and I think if you got the right CBD or the right dosage and you figured out what helps, and that's the important thing is you have to do a little bit of experimentation until the doctors get online just to figure out what helps me get rid of that anxiety. And then you have to be hard on yourself and say, okay, I'm only going to do this when it's medicine. It's not for fun. And then I think you'd be fine. But definitely, I think they should give some kind of briefings uh, for cannabis use at colleges. In the early 70s, I was a sophomore in high school. I did an economics project where we had to come up with a product, market it, jingle, all this stuff. And my product was cannabis soap. Okay, now this was the 70s. And the instructor called me in and he said, "Hey, this is not a good idea." And I walked out thinking, "Hey, I'm the smartest guy, the smartest sophomore here because it is a good idea." Now I got a D minus on that project. But if you look 50 years later, you walk into the store, you're buying CBD all over the place. Everything's got CBD in it. Heck, and you can buy THC in the gas station. So who is the forward thinker, me or that economics teacher? Yeah. So that's why I think if they got into that business and I think it would stay. People would go to it. Nowadays, everything is all crossed with everything else, and it's a flood of different genetics and flavors. Back then, it was old school, and that's kind of where, like, we're taking our channel is back to the old school, what they call land races. Because back in those days, you could get your Acapulco gold, your Colombian gold, um, and nowadays you can't find those strains because um, they've been crossed with all sorts of stuff. It takes a lot of hunting to find something like that. But yeah, that's why I think they'll survive. That's what I'm aiming at is the old school because I always thought it was better back then. It tastes good now, but it was real then. In my day, we did it because we were told it was evil and we weren't supposed to do it. So it was like game on. I'm a big cannabis guy, and neither one of my children consume. Neither one of had a drinking issue. Neither one of my children drink. You know, I don't drink anymore, but yeah. So it's kind of the same on reversed here. Is they don't, and I still do. But yeah, back in the day, it was the Reagan just say no war on drugs thing. So yeah.
My name is Meta Boucher. I am a YouTuber that covers the subject of ethnobotany, which is the study of plants and the cultures that use them, but it's usually plant drugs. I'm kind of the plant drug guy, I guess, on YouTube. The cool thing about universities is there's like people like you that just do stuff because you're interested, and that can kind of serve as a way to help, way to educate, way to protect. But I also think like that's just also when you're 18 to 22, your job is kind of to fuck up. That's kind of your job is to like, oh, yeah, I did some stupid stuff and now I don't want to do that again. I cannot count the amount of like insane things that I did. And I'm so glad I did because now I know my limit, you know? But yeah, I don't know. I think weed is my point on weed is that I think it's sometimes too normalized, but also it's not a big deal. So I think, we're in this generation where weed is basically alcohol in America. It's just like another, you can smoke weed, you can do alcohol, right? And I think that's all fine and dandy, but I do think that like the people my generation and older who legalized it, like to fought to legalize it, they spread a lot of bull where we still have to unlearn. Like they would use arguments like it's not a drug, it's a plant. Like that's not how drugs work. I think culturally we're going through I think America and all cultures kind of go through this cycle of conservative, liberal, left, right, left, right. And I think we're obviously going down like a really hard right thing right now because we went really like 2020, we were real left. And now we're just going super, super conservative again. And I think kids, I don't know, maybe you could educate me on this. When I was a kid, doing drugs was like, that's just what you do, right? But now it feels like cool kids who probably would be doing drugs are now like, it's cool to on drugs. It's cool to on like, right? Which I don't think is necessarily good or bad. It's just kind of the culture that we're in. I don't know if how that's going to translate to laws. I think socially it'll probably start to become more taboo to smoke, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I think maybe we go a little bit too far sometimes and think it's totally fine to smoke all the time. No, it's not. Need to have a job, right? So I think the war on drugs is not just an 80s thing. It's not just a, 90s and the DARE program thing. That's just what every country does. There's always going to be a war on drugs because that's how you criminalize people. That's how you control the people. I was just in Peru 3 days ago doing a story on coca leaves. And the government there, even though it's an ancestral plant that they've been using for thousands of years, it contains cocaine. And the government uses that fact to control the indigenous people because that's just another way they control them. And I think that's the war on drugs. That's essentially the same thing. It's just the war on drugs is always going to be evolving. It's just another way that a government can control its people. When you criminalize anything, not even drugs, but just like anything, it gives police, it gives a state more power to control the people in any which way they want. So like if you criminalize something like weed, right? Obviously the law technically applies to everyone, regardless of skin color. But the way the law works is that you can put more funding in policing certain areas that are predominantly black or brown more heavily. And so that's how you get, people who are getting arrested at a much higher rate because of their skin color, not because the law is discriminating, but it's because they just choose to police certain people more for a number of reasons, right? And I think it's also like with how we saw with crack and cocaine and around the world, it's like it's just such an easy narrative to spread about black and brown people or just minorities in whatever country and culture that they have a drug problem, that they do this, that we have to help them. You're doing the same racist lawmaking, you're just putting a bow on it and acting like you're better.
I'm Dr. Joseph Wittering. I'm a board certified psychiatrist, and I have a special interest in cannabis-induced psychosis. And I've been talking widely about this on social media over the last year. My content does focus on helping people come off psychiatric medications. It's actually what I do in my private practice. And and the reason why I became so interested in cannabis-induced psychosis was because I was seeing so many people come to my practice who were misdiagnosed with bipolar and schizophrenia. And when you took the history, Usually what had happened was someone had, they'd moved to college, they joined a frat, and they had started smoking cannabis. And what we know from the psychiatric literature is that that is one of the biggest risk factors for having a drug-induced psychosis, which is then later misdiagnosed as bipolar or schizophrenia. And so that's how I got really interested in this topic. But I think one of the reasons why people get so, they're like when they hear claims like this, they say, oh, there's this doctor online, he's talking about cannabis-induced psychosis. He's just one of these, like, because we went through this a long time ago. I think in the 70s, there was this whole thing about reefer madness where, doctors were exaggerating claims about cannabis. And it was a political issue back then. I mean, this was kind of coming out of Nixon, and there was the war on drugs. And really, it was kind of like a moral issue. People were very against that. And so they exaggerated the concerns about the medications. And it makes a lot of sense that people would have the same suspicions now. And so we've got this like history there, but then there's also the issue about that cannabis is so common. Hell, I've smoked a lot of cannabis in my youth. I've done it. I've known a lot of people who've smoked cannabis. And the thing that makes it interesting is cannabis-induced psychosis is a fairly uncommon problem. And so a lot of people listening to this right now have had experience smoking cannabis and they have been fine. They have friends that have been smoking cannabis for 10 years, 20 years, and they are fine. And so when they hear things like this, they go, well, that doesn't really make sense to me. That doesn't mesh with, what I'm seeing around me. But what I have to remind them about is that even if this is happening to a small amount of people, it is still important. Because for that small number of people who are susceptible to this, it can be really, really life-changing. And so the issue with cannabis-induced psychosis is that it is a rare reaction. So you could have like 20 people hanging out at a party, someone's passing around joints. 19 of them are giggling, they're laughing, they're feeling relaxed, they're having a good time. It's not a big deal. But there might be one person there who starts to become a little bit paranoid. And that is the person who the drug is not a good fit for. And many people have been to college. We've been to high school. We've been hanging out with people. We know what peer pressure is like. That kid, even if he has a bad reaction, may feel like, hey, there's something weird about me. I just need to go along with this. And so they can get peer pressured into using more of a substance that is actually harmful for them. Psychosis emerges randomly in the general population at a rate of around 1 in 100. That's just the background risk of schizophrenia. Okay, so that's normal. But so 15 years ago, there was a study published in the Lancet. This is a big medical journal. It was done by an author called D40. And they looked at two groups of people who were smoking cannabis on a daily basis. One group was smoking 5% THC, and another group was smoking 15% THC. They then looked at how frequently these two groups went on to develop psychosis. Now, in the group who was smoking the 5% stuff, the rate was no different. It was still 1%. So essentially background rate, no increased risk. But in the group who was smoking 15% THC, it increased by fivefold. And so we're essentially talking about going from a 1 in 100 chance of developing this to going to a 1 in 20 chance of developing this if you're using some of the high potency stuff. And we need to trust our gut. There's something about the developing nervous system that just makes it a lot more susceptible to drug-induced psychosis. But I'd also want people to be a little bit wary about leaning on a drug for mental health problems. And so, like, if you're having insomnia or if you have anxiety when you go out, or if you just feel like really stressed out at the end of the day, and you start to think, oh, maybe I want to, maybe I should use cannabis, maybe that'll help, because it's this natural, safe thing. I would say, pump the brakes. I want you to get really curious about where those symptoms are coming from, because those symptoms usually mean something, and it usually falls into, a couple domains. It's usually physical health. And then we also want to look at things like your relationships and a sense of purpose and meaning in your life. Whether you're like stressed out all the time because you're super busy and you're studying all the time, and then in your downtime, you're just on social media, just kind of like ramping yourself up in a way. Because I think a lot of people intuitively are like, Yeah, it's a drug, and it's probably not a good thing to do a drug every day. It's probably not a good thing. Like, if this is a crutch to cope, there are things that you can do to get there and to fix those problems that are safer and more sustainable than using cannabis.
Thank you for listening. Again, your host Tatiana Diomi, and this is The Rundown only on WNYU 89.1 FM.